My baby, my Valentine. Yeah. Can I you they making my temperature the rise? If you leave me, I could die. I swear.
DJ
You
Yo,
are like the
écoutez
oxygen
qui
I
sont.
need to survive. I'll be honest. Your love ain't it totally me. I am so obsessed. I want to chop your kwabi ule. Your body they make me she ule. Open up, make I see ule. You my love one city. If you make a bad man sing, oh, America's on fire. They gonna burn whole cities down. The president's a tyrant. Ain't no reparations going round. It's been burning deep inside. Got us held down to the ground. Fed up, strung out on fire. Just pawns in their playground. Need to pull up. Don't slow down to fight this till it's ours. Need to pull up. Don't slow down to fight this till it's ours. We'll be fanning all the flames. For queen and country, you're to blame. Take to the streets like Groundhog Day. Marching on, we'll say their names. They say move on, the war is over. Our histories are not the same, but it's too late to talk it over. We know this time we need a change. Need to pull up. Need to pull up. Don't slow down. Don't you slow down to fight this. Need to fight this till it's ours. Need to pull up. Need to pull up. Don't slow down. Don't you slow down to fight this. Need to fight this till it's ours. Till it's ours.
Hello, 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 good people. Welcome to our Triple E kitchen table. We hope that you are settled in and feeling comfortable as we prepare for what promises and what we hope will be an invigorating conversation about fugitivity, abolition, equity, and excellence in education. My name is Esther Ojito. I'm an assistant professor of English literacy education at Rutgers, New Brunswick. I am also a Leo, and I like long walks in the park and British pop songs from the 80s. So, just some fun facts about me. I'm sharing co hosting duties today at the kitchen table with some of my Triple E family. Justin Coles, assistant professor and director of arts, culture, and political engagement at the UMass Center of Racial Justice and Youth Engaged Research. And more importantly, Justin, what's your sign?
The same as you, fortunately.
Oh, a Leo.
Yeah.
Okay, a Leo. Very importantly, a Leo. Jamila Liscott, a lover of ratchet things who refuses the hegemony of astrological signs and is an assistant professor and founding co-director of the Center of Racial Justice and Youth Engaged Research at UMass Amherst. And Keisha Green, a Scorpio, but we love her anyway, an associate professor and founding co-director of the Center of Racial Justice and Youth Engaged Research, also at UMass Amherst. All four of us come out of Black or Afro-diasporic cultural contexts where intergenerational gatherings like this are framed by elders. So it's in the spirit of that practice that we open the kitchen table for talk using the words of our late great ancestor, the wordsmith Lucille Clifton.
Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model. Born in Babylon, both non-white and woman, what did I see to be except myself? I made it up here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed.
Every day. So we are absolutely delighted that you are here and you are present to celebrate with us what we have shaped into some kind of space undergirded by Black feminist praxis. A space for us, by us, for the express purpose of conversing, co-creating, theorizing, laughing, and maybe even crying a little bit, and doing all else that comes organically when we have life-affirming and life-sustaining dialogue and community. We are a large family here at Triple E, and we have built and continue to construct this space with support from an incredible group of committed people. So shout out to our editorial assistants, editorial apprentices, and amazing board members, many of whom I know are here today. A few things to keep in mind about this space as we begin. In this space, we resist what Jamila has called traditional Zoom ways of knowing. So we show up as our authentic selves, whoever we may be in a certain moment, with our stories, our food, and our drinks. So this is tea, which may or may not have something else in it. We bring questions, but in the spirit of the kitchen table talk, if the conversation takes on a life of its own, we just lean with it and rock with it. By way of a format, we will pose one question for each paper that was published in our most recent issue and ask that the authors jump in to both respond to the question as well as cross-dialogue and answer to all the questions. In many ways, the pursuit of abolition and fugitivity is moored to a fundamental question about to whom we are answerable, as Lee Patel often reminds us. We who are invested in notions of equity and excellence in education are not and cannot be answerable to the very systems and structures that we seek to abolish and take refuge from. So to our authors, we're not going to go the traditional bio route. Instead, as a means of learning a little bit about your inner world, your interiority, and your commitments, before you answer the question that's posed to you, please let us know to whom you are answerable. And with that, I'm going to hand things over to Justin to get us going.
Sorry, everyone. All right, so we are going to get started with our first paper. And this will be for Blanca Caldas, who is the author of the piece. I felt powerful, imagining re-existence through an embodied fugitive pedagogy for Mexican American Latinx teachers. And so first, Blanca, just hello and how are you? It's really great to see you. And so I want to start with the question that we'll be asking everyone. I want to invite you to talk a bit about who you are answerable to in your work. And then after you have a moment to discuss that, I want to think about, so in your article, you make it clear that your vision or imagining of fugitivity is grounded in decolonial pedagogy. And so I want to invite you to discuss the way such fugitivity in re-existence as decolonial pedagogy is achieved through your arts-based methods with the teacher candidates, namely through the skits, right, that drama-based work. And if you can tell us, like, what is the relationship between fugitive educational practices and ways of being and such arts-based methods? What do they allow teacher candidates to see, to know, and to do? Thank you, Blanca.
Hi, Justina. Hi, everybody. I got kind of by surprise that I'm going to be the first one. But I was thinking and looking at all you, and I remember writing with you and Brooke. One of the things that I can think of is that every time, and especially lately, well, my most recent papers, especially this one, is how I'm detaching to what academics should be, and it becomes more and more personal. So that paper was written in a very difficult time of my life. And I think at first, when I started my PhD, or even when I was in my master's degree, I was thinking of my work being linked to people who look like me in the United States as a recent immigrant then, or the brown immigrant people and children from Latin America. And I'm like right now is transformed and it's become more deep in that I am also a mother of a child who is a brown kid, who's just crying in the background. So it's become very, very personal. And it goes back to one of the pieces in conversation with Bettina and Lee, and I think Dave, I think it was Dave, talking about how my life personally and academically has been always the resistance, always the fighting back. And it's a tiring thing. It's a tiring thing to always push back instead of like building things, like running to something instead of running against something. So it's based on that. I use the framing of Afro-Colombian Adolfo Alban and his work on resistance. So trying to work out, and it's a play of word resistencia or resistance and re-existence, just trying to imagine what it would be and dreaming out loud how we want to imagine ourselves. In this case, in my piece, is how you conjure up. I mean, it's a kind of conjuration, like using your body in order to prepare yourself, in order to not only dream, but prepare your body for your future. How my students in that case wanted to present themselves as not only teachers, but also as advocates, who were trying their shoes and trying not only to imagine, but what it feels like to be an advocate, what it feels like to be the kind of teacher they want to be way before they became certified to do so. So I would, again, it goes back to feelings and self-love and dreaming despite all the things that are upon against you. Because one of the things that I learned from them is that because they were in a teacher preparation program, they thought that they were going to be immune to all the institutional racism, because they thought that, oh, I'm going to have my teaching license and that's going to be it. But there are more things to fight. But instead of not only to prepare themselves for that kind of resistance, also a way to imagine their re-existence as teachers, as advocates. I don't know if that answers your questions, but and I think that comes to the self. There are many. One of the things I've noticed also, not only in my career but in general, there is a lot of intellectualization, especially during the uprisings here in Minneapolis, and I live in Minneapolis, so I've been at the epicenter of the uprising here in Minneapolis because of George Floyd systemic racism here, that you just breathe it here, that lots of scholars and people started reading about these issues, but these concepts stay at that intellectual level. There is no connection between intellect, the brain, and the body and the self. So I think that's one of the things that is powerful with a kind of embodied pedagogies, and one of them, and again, is the one that I offer in the paper that I wrote, that is based on Augusto Boal's work on theater of the press. Use the body to, as quoting him, is to prepare oneself for revolution, rehearsing for revolution, which is amazing. I mean, it speaks so much for me as a former actress, of bringing a lot of selves and a lot of feelings, and the vulnerability of putting yourself out there in the middle of the class, using your body and showing your feelings, and being vulnerable for critique and feedback, if you want to say something like that. So it was a transformative experience, not only for my students but for myself. I'm in awe by those teachers.
Yeah, thank you so much, Blanca. I'm just gonna, with the time that we have for your paper, I'm gonna pose another question that came up for me as you were talking. And of course, given the dialogue, if other folks feel compelled to sort of jump in with Blanca on this question, please do. You mentioned this idea of embodiment, and I think when I read your paper and when I hear you talk, and I'm sure all of us here would agree, there's a way in which I think fugitivity and abolition, particularly for many of us marginalized folks, minoritized folks, folks made vulnerable, by systems, it's innate to us. There's something that it's natural, but I think we live in this world that makes it seem unnatural or distant from who we are. So it's almost like a fighting to regain it. And I think the teachers were doing that, right, through the skits. What was that process like for them to kind of understand this like rediscovery, or fugitivity perhaps as not linear, but this sort of stumbling back and forth to relearn and uncover parts of ourselves that may always be there, but we can't see them because of these systems?
As I said in the paper, that part of my research, or what you see in the paper, is just the culmination of a whole semester. So it started with playing, like standing up and moving your body and imagining in different situations. So it doesn't happen like, okay, let's do this, and we are going to read that and you're already there. It happened to unlearn how teachers and students should be in the classroom, especially in academia, sitting down on your desk, watching somebody talking, whatever, in front of the class, using a PowerPoint. It was a lot of movement. So because that happens from the get-go, my students started mobilizing their own bodies, mobilizing their memories to store, mobilizing also the traumas that they got because they experienced these things as students. So they mobilized, they awakened their bodies and their souls, and they were open to be able to create this kind of skits at the end. That wouldn't have happened without that. So this is an ongoing process that is fought every day. And there were lots of, emotional episodes, I could say. There were lots of paralysis too, because students are not, nobody is used to doing this kind of work. So paralysis because they were very afraid of expressing their emotions, because they didn't think that it was appropriate, especially in the ivory tower, to start crying, for example, in front of the class. That's unnatural. Also anger, a lot of anger, because they saw themselves reflected in those stories. And I mentioned that some of them started volunteering in dual language schools, and they saw it firsthand what was going on. So it was not something that was just only written in textbooks, but something that they experienced, and that anger and that frustration, that righteous outrage was present during the skits. So what I write in the paper is just, what I could say is that the writing is not enough to describe what happened in the classroom, because there is another energy that it's electrifying what happens, and that speaks to you, to your body. My remembering, just only remembering that gives me goosebumps, because it was real for all of us, and that's why it was imprinted in our sensations, and that's why it's so memorable. I guess that happened like 6 years ago, and I still remember it. And I'm sure my students remember that too, because we felt.
Great. Thank you so much, Blanca. And thank you for considering us as a place to publish this great work. And we'll move on to the next piece with Jamila.
Justin, if I could jump in real quick.
Jump in.
It really, like, hearing you speak really made me think of this book, right? My Body Is Not an Apology. Right. And why the body is so important and what the body holds and how we are taught to apologize for our bodies, how we are taught that these bodies that we are in are not right, are not supposed to be here, right? And one of my favorite quotes from this book is, living in a female body, a Black body, an Asian body, a fat body, a body with mental illness is to awaken daily to a planet that expects a certain set of apologies to already live on our tongues. A certain set of apologies that already live on our tongues because of the bodies that we are in. And it, like, hearing you speak just reminds me of how we show up in these bodies and what that really means to show up in our bodies, and how our bodies make meaning when we don't want it to make meaning sometimes in spaces, right? And we apologize for that. And then when you own your body and you sit with your body and you make peace with your body, and you know, in this book she talks about, like, this radical self-love is not even accepting your body, it's loving your body. Then it gets real, right? The ideas of abolition, the ideas of all these things we're talking about, that's when it really gets real. And that's really hard. It's really hard. But like that,
it is,
hard.
especially in space. Yeah, especially in the spaces where we are brains on a stick, like in academia. Everything that is valued is our brain. So we are not brains on a stick. We are feeling sentient beings in the classroom that can cry and laugh. And there was a lot of laughter and silliness in this exercise. It is serious, a serious play. And that's an amazing way to put it. Serious play where they could laugh and cry in a, I would say, safe place to do that. At the same time, it's a dangerous place also to be. And all of us were putting our skin on the line to do this kind of work, because outside that was not permitted, that was not allowed outside the classroom. And on top of that, it was not done in English. So there are more threats. So I think there was a space of refuge for us where we could call it home. And that was like that for me.
I want to build on what you said. I loved reading your piece because I think of how white supremacy shows up in K through 12 or higher ed or in the academy. It's around knowledge versus knowing, or the cognitive being positioned as more important than the affective, right? To really talk about honoring the body and the self as ways of knowing and learning challenges that. So I loved reading your piece. Thank you.
Yeah, Descartes did a number on us. Sorry, Jamila.
No,
number on us. You know, this mind-body split is just bullshit. And our homes are, as Steph put in the chat, our bodies will never lie to us. And yet our body, as Tina so beautifully quoted and reminded us, that so many people have been telling us, you will be conditioned to apologize for your body. Too emotional, too loud, too big, too dark, too whatever it is. It's the moving signifier that Stuart Hall tried to tell us about over and over again. And yet our bodies are the places in which, if we feel more, if we feel even as much as we think, there's so much there that's waiting for us. And I've been thinking about that phrase a lot. Feel more than we think, as a way to being in our bodies in healthy ways, and knowing that our bodies are not innately on the margins. Intergenerationally, through harm, they've been put on the margins. We're not the margins. Toni Morrison has been trying to tell us so well and so beautifully forever. No. We are at the center. You come to this center when you're ready.
Lee, what's that quote you got about anti-Blackness? Drop that real quick.
What quote do I have about anti-Blackness? I don't know. Tina, you have to remind me what I say. You said,
You told me one day we were on the phone. It was just lovely. You said something like, Blackness is bigger than anti-Blackness.
Yes. Now I know what you're talking about. Okay. So this is something also that I would, when I don't care what the course is called. I don't ever care what the course is called. We are talking about life, and we are talking about resistance from oppression and the constant freedom struggles that have always been there. Yes. Thank you, Tina. So in all of those courses and in our gatherings, it's so important when, like, we can teach forever about settler colonialism. And then where does that get us? And we have to remind ourselves that for centuries, colonialism has been trying to collapse Blackness into fungible chattel property, and it has failed. Coloniality has been trying for centuries to convince us that there is a binary of gender and sexuality, and it has failed. It has been trying to tell brown people that we are coolie labor, and it has failed. It has been trying to tell us all of these lies. Has it taken lives? Yes. Has it hurt souls? Without a doubt. But has it won? Not a chance. It has failed. Thanks for that reminder, Tina. You're the best.
Oh, loving the energy, loving the flow of conversation, and the fact that y'all are invoking the kitchen table talk vibes by chiming in. Feel free to stay unmuted. I just want to, in thinking about this conversation, it's just really interesting the way that when we talk about things like abolition and when we have these kind of conversations, it can sound like some kind of abstraction, but the way that it lives in our bodies and it's an embodied experience is so important for us to remember. And it's resonating with folks in the chat. I'm going to turn to the actual kitchen table talk piece in this particular issue that was co-authored by one of our amazing students, Olivia O'Neill, who facilitated a conversation with Drs. Bettina Love, Lee Patel, and David Stovall. And the piece is called No Trifling Matter. It's open access. Please check it out. Check out all the pieces for sure. What I want to ask you all about, along with making sure that you check in with us around who you're answerable to, because we want to know, just as a way to learn a little bit more about your interior world, who are you answerable to in the work and in your everyday walk. We're curious about what people are getting right about abolition and fugitivity. And then also what are people getting wrong about it? We saw the Abolitionist Teachers Network put up a post about the distinctions between abolitionist teaching and multicultural education and anti-racist education, because there's so much conflation, right? And that's a broader conversation that I think ATN is speaking to. And so we want to know, what are people getting right about this, and what are people conflating or need nuance and clarity around? But first, who you answerable to?
Peace, y'all. And thank you, Jamila, so much for that question. I am answerable to my grandmother, Edna Stovall, who lived to be 100. And I'm answerable to my uncle, Malone Wilson, who turned 99 on Saturday. So one love, gotta show you love all the time. And he always tells me, he said, look, you still over there talking with them white folks? Tell them the truth. So that's how he starts his conversations, right? But I think the thing that abolition gets right is this understanding of the end of harm, the end of things that are harming people, to actively commit to the end of the processes and practices that harm people inwardly and outwardly. So abolition is a commitment to the self to do the work with others, right? And I think the other thing that abolition does well is reminding us that anything you are willing to destroy, you must build something in its place for your freedom, right? So as a tangible thing, right? I think what a lot of people are going to the other part around what people are getting wrong, right? people think that you can just tack on abolition to any other thing, and now that becomes abolition, right? And we miss the point around the harm of the prison industrial complex, the harm of schooling, the harm of sexism, the harm of patriarchy, the harm of transphobia. But it's not about tacking it on to something, but it's really around saying, what are we doing to eliminate the harms that have been mirrored by the prison industrial complex, right? By human enslavement, right? So this thing around being tangible about that, because a lot of times people think about this thing as additive, right? And that one, and the thing is, abolition can include those things, but it is not those things because we are clear about what that harm is. So now when we think about that, not just harm reduction, because it's not harm reduction, because, you know, psychologists can get into that too, but we have to think about what is harm elimination, right? So now when you start to think about harm elimination, how do you engage in those practices? How do you stop them for yourselves? How are you held to account by the people you know and love? And then this thing of thinking about what are those things connected to? And one last thing around what abolition struggles with, I think, we all have to read a chapter by Miriam Kaba about R. Kelly. And I'm gonna tell y'all, I was not prepared for it, because what she is saying in this thing, I don't think a lot of folks are ready to come to grips with. She talks about living in the face of the harm that R. Kelly has brought to all of those Black women and girls. But now to think about, does his castigation and arrest and life imprisonment, does that end rape culture? Does that end misogyny? Does that end a practice that continues to harm women identified folks? It is one of the toughest things I've ever had to read, right? And that thing around coming to grips with that, I think, becomes critically important when we think about what does it mean to imagine a world that does not have prisons, and to imagine a place where there is justice for the shooter, because the shooter has also been harmed. Again, tough, right? I won't lie to y'all about that. I struggle with that, but I think it's important to engage those struggles.
Ooh, y'all chime in. See, thank you so much.
I'll jump in if that's all right, Tina. Is that okay with you? That's cool. And you unmute. Just I like the idea. Let's just stay unmuted. Because I want to hear your laugh. I want to hear Dr. Love's laugh. Thanks for that, Dave. You know, I will not lie. I got a little bit nervous when I saw lots more things in education articles saying the word fugitivity. And I joked with my good friend Erica Miners not too long ago. I said, well, now everybody's an abolitionist, so you'll work a lot easier, right? And of course she laughed because it didn't get easier. The work of distinction became more and more important. The understanding that when we, and this is something that's in the piece that Olivia guided so well, and so much appreciation for Olivia, that when we are actually creating ways of being with each other that is in the interest of flourishing, that is in the interest of repair, that is abolition work. So often it gets confused with tearing down, when it's really, I think, better understood as altering relationships and altering our relationship with having throwaway people. So to Dave's point, you know, removing a person who has harmed does not remove the harm, does not remove the culture of harm. With fugitivity, I love that one of the things that we were able to talk about with each other is that it is not so much a running away from, where that is necessary, but a deeply incomplete understanding of fugitivity. It is a running towards, and it is a creation of. And it can be, however, temporary, and it is. it needs not to be lengthy and across generations for it to count. So fugitivity also includes the desire to flee from fleeing, the desire to not always be fleeing, but fleeing because it's at that moment and at that time necessary. And it's also running towards something. So if it's understood as fleeing from, this is necessary, but deeply incomplete understanding of how I've come to know fugitivity. And I would just add, who am I answerable to? I really appreciate this question. I am answerable to so many. I'm answerable to, obviously, the people, particularly the women who came before me. I've been thinking a lot about the ways that that our ancestors kept secrets, and how much so many of us were raised to keep secrets. And I've been thinking about thanking our ancestors for keeping those secrets, and thanking them because that means I don't have to keep secrets anymore. That means that I can, along with others, can break the silence and say, of course, in justice spaces, harm will be done, because we still live in a culture of harm. We still live in a culture of extraction, of hierarchy. I am also answerable to many beings that are not human. I think this is feeling more and more important for me to note. We've gotten so many things wrong in the pandemic. I don't have enough digits to count them. But at every turn, racial capitalism has made a decision that makes the USA #1 in horrible ways. And I hope we've had a chance to remember, if we had forgotten, that plants and animals are our greatest teachers. So I am answerable to the waterways and the skyways and the landways.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, what's up, everybody? What's good? It's good to see all of y'all. I'm answerable to, I don't even know how many people, how many gods, how many spirits. It's just a lot. I think some days that's the question, that consumes you some days. But I would say, the first person I try to be answered after my God, after my kids, after my ancestors is myself. I have to sit down and live with the decisions that I make. When I think about abolition, for me, it's to sit in the vulnerability, it's to sit in the shame, it's to sit in the harm, it's to sit with all of those things and try to figure it out in community. And you're gonna mess that up too. It's all of that. It's hard. It's trying to, I think Mariam Kaba said this as well. This is the person you want to be in this world. It's the person that I call this is your social media person. The person you want to be on social media. And then this is who you are in real life. And every day trying to work your best to get them folks as close as possible, knowing that they ain't never gonna get there. That for me is abolition. It is deeply personal. It is painful. It is fumbling, as Mariam Kaba talks about. We fumble towards this. We struggle towards this. And I just had somebody tell me at 5:29 before I got on this call, is that, Tina, I don't see right and wrong. I see a person trying to get closer to the decisions of abolition. I just had that told to me before I got on this call. I don't see so abolition asks us not to be in these binary spaces of right and wrong or male or female, all these binaries that we put ourselves in. Abolition is calling on us to just every day try to live in these bodies, try to figure it out, try to find peace, try to find vulnerability, try to do less harm, try to be accountable, knowing we gonna mess up. And it's just hard. It's really, really hard. And I think that's where you get frustrated when people put abolition before something, or because you're like, this is hard. You know, I got regrets every day writing that damn book, right? Because it's like, it's like, you know, it's hard. It's just hard. And if anybody tells you it's easy, they ain't doing the work. If anybody tells you they haven't messed up, they not doing the work. If anybody tells you, you know, they haven't harmed somebody, that's not what this is about. It is deeply personal. It's deeply reflective. It's sitting with the vulnerability. It's sitting with the shame. It's sitting with the hurt. It's trying to hold yourself accountable and then messing up again. Right? It's hard. And the more I practice it every day, the harder it is. But then it's the idea that it's possible, right? And going back to Kava again, right? Hope is a discipline. And wanting to see this world and knowing you're not gonna see it in your lifetime, but you're gonna see it. Right? And so it's this beautiful place to sit. And I'm realizing every day how much I mess up and how much I need folks to help me, and understanding that that's deeply part of abolition.
Yeah, folk want to think it's clean. It's not clean work. I mean, it's the funkiest shit that you have to deal with. It is going into the toilet and saying it's funkier shit than that. I mean, it's, man, y'all, when we say this to everybody on the call, you know, on the panel, on the call, man, this thing is going to have you ask questions as to why you do what you do and how you understand why you do what you do. And that's not a question that you're answering to anyone outside of yourself. That's the toughest thing, right? When you are by yourself and the lights are off, what are you saying? Right? And that thing's because you can't fool that person, right? I can talk hella shit outside of that, but you are not going to fool the person when the lights are off and you are by yourself, right? I mean, like that thing, I appreciate the kitchen table talk because this isn't academic speak. I know I see people got hella books behind them and shit, but the same thing is really around understanding this, right? And really coming to grips, like, I cannot implore how much this will change how you move in the world, right? When you understand harm, how you have harmed and how you're trying to end harm, it's a different, like the lens by which you operate is different, right? Like Lee's point, like Lee and the homie Karina, I used to nickname them like nature, right? We used to be like, look, nature, but they are reminding me that once those things have been taken away, they do not return in the same way. In fact, when they return, they are hella angry. And that's what a drought is. And that's what rivers overflowing is. You cannot continue to harm a living thing and not expect it to bang back. That's what climate change is. So now when we think about it in that way, it takes us to a different space. And abolition is taking us to a different space, but a space that is deeply personal and inward. And it's not something that is tabulated or quantified in terms of the halls of academia.
The last thing I'm gonna say, I keep it on my phone. It's by Robin D.G. Kelley. Without new visions, we don't know what to build, only what to knock down. We not only end confused and riddleless and cynical, but we forget that making a revolution is not a series of clever maneuvers and tactics, but a process that can and must transform us. It is not a series, like in that, I think that's the part of academia within abolition that gets lost, is that we think it's just being smart. We think it's just about knowledge. We think it's just about, you know, making these maneuvers and being clever in our own particular type of ways. And we haven't been transformed. Right. And this, you know, this is how I explain abolition to little kids, right? You got garbage in this trash bag. You gonna bring the garbage to your new house, or you gonna leave it at your old house? You ain't gonna bring that garbage to your new house. How would you wanna go in there fresh and clean? It's all your new stuff, right? But you still got the garbage and you ain't take the garbage out. And it's asking us to do something with our mess, to do something with our harm, to do something with our ways in which we understand in our bodies race and gender and class and money and capitalism and color. Like, it's asking us to do something with all of this, to address all of this, to tackle all of this, to come to grips with it. And if we don't, we just go from new house to new house with the trash, smelling up everything, right? And that's really, it's so personal, and it's so hard. And I think that's what gets lost. And so I don't know. Some days I just don't know what abolition is. Some days I just don't know. And I hope I wake up tomorrow and I know, or I'm figured it out, or I'm doing better, or I'm trying. But as Dave is saying, it's hard because you're just trying to be the best you can in your body. And that is really, really hard. You know, I tell my kids all the time, being human is hard. It's just a hard thing. It's just so many emotions to deal with on top of all this other shit, like white supremacy and racial capitalism. Like, I'm just trying to be here. And it's hard, and you do harm. And it's what keeps you up at night. If you're really about this work, it keeps you up at night.
Tina, thanks so much for bringing in Robin D.G. Kelley. I just wanted to add something along, because if we're not participating with the archives that Robin D.G. Kelley has curated for us, I don't know what we're doing. And I know that also, you know, participating in the work of freedom and feeling that urge of like, this is too hard. I really would just, you know, that we just took this person out of whatever group that has been in this group. That feeling, that's when I know, like, oh, that's when I'm carrying the trash around with me. And that feeling comes up a lot when we're doing work, when we refuse to throw people away, when we refuse to do harm to all forms of life. It's hard. It's easy to be like, you know what, I'm sick of this. I'm sick of holding this space. I'm sick of it's tiring, it's fatiguing. Why do I find myself doing it again and again? And that's why hope is a discipline. As Miriam Kaba says, it is a disciplined thing to engage with it, because you know that the outcome eventually through process will be a process in which it's not so hard all the time, in which our instincts aren't to just like jettison that person away because we think that's going to make our life easier. But that little, when I have that feeling of like, ugh, what if I just don't talk to this person anymore? That's when I've lost track, and I always need community to pull me back and say, well, maybe you take a break. And I think for real, this is the last thing I'll say for the moment. Like, I go back to Mao Zedong's essay on practice all the time, because we need to practice all the time. And retreat is also an essential form of our practice, because we need to rejuvenate. We need to restore in order to show up, not being like, I'm done with this.
Wow. Yo, this authenticity is so affirming and so humanizing and so disruptive. I'm just emotional hearing just like the rawness. And as the editors, I know that something that's so important to us is to have the work live and breathe in this way, in ways that academic writing typically doesn't have an opportunity to. And so thank you so much for this paper. Thank you so much for how you walk through the world and who you choose to be every day. And we're just honored that you chose to have this piece in the journal. We're gonna push the conversation forward and invite Dr. Ojito to pose a question at this point.
Thank you, Jamila. And thank you, Lee, Dave, and Bettina. There's so many threads in that conversation that I want to pick up on, and I'm going to keep mulling over for a while. I'm really interested in this notion of, or this relationship between abolition and vulnerability that you named. And I'm curious about how you understand intimacy as part of that. Like, if abolition requires a kind of bearing oneself, then what does that then ask of us in terms of intimacy? I'm also really curious about this reference to this gesturing towards play and children and childhood. And I think about mistakes and the way that children handle mistakes, and so much of what we can learn from children and how they treat themselves and treat other people when they make mistakes. And when they fumble in trying to figure something out. So those are the two things, among lots of other things, that I'm really going to be mulling over. But for this moment, I'm gonna invite Brooke into the conversation, who wrote about children in her piece, children's literature. And Brooke, first, I love the piece. I love the title of your piece, which was Fugitivity, Fantasy, Futurity, and Freedom, the letter F for critically analyzing children's literature. So when I think about the letter F, it's typically not in relation to fugitivity, fantasy, futurity, or freedom. So I have a couple of questions for you. The first one is, to whom are you answerable? And specific to your article, tell us what possibilities for rethinking fugitivity adults may have, or what possibilities for rethinking fugitivity may be hidden in children's books and children's literature.
Thank you for the question, Esther. First of all, I want to address this idea of who I'm answerable to. On the call today, I have a college roommate. She's a special education special educator. I have former professors on the call. I'm not sure if she was able to make it, but she reached out to say that she would be here. My high school English teacher, who taught me multicultural literature for the very first time. This is the first class where I was, in a circle, in a space, honestly, that's as close as possible to this kitchen table vibe as you could have in a high school setting before we were ready for that. I've got neighbors, friends, mentors on this call. And so I feel like I'm answerable to you and the folks that I cited in my work. But then downstairs, as I'm participating now, I've got my mom and my 2 Black daughters. We're an intergenerational home, which I think is a perfect example of the richness of Black culture. And I feel a responsibility to both of them, because I see the ways that my mother resisted and ways that were possible for her. And I'm adding to that, and then my children as well. So when I think about what Dr. Love said about how we enter these spaces and there's a requirement of us or a request of us already to apologize, that is what I do not want for my children. That is what I do not want for the generations that come after us. And so I think, with my piece, there's a couple of things that I wanted to do. First, looking back, when we think about children, from the beginning of our time in this country, when I say our time, I'm talking about Black folks, marginalized folks. We have examples of, the first iterations of children's literature about or for Black children demonstrated how they could be symbols of our looking forward, symbols of us trying to achieve that freedom, because it was safe to push the envelope a little bit, as they say, with thinking about children or writing about children. It was less threatening. So we've got Black characters in children's literature that are the first iterations of what it might be like to dream for a future. And so I think about that looking back in terms of historically. And then I also think about today, every day, Black children have always been collaborators. Children in general are the ones that we need to look at as leaders. So we are learning from them all the time. And when appropriate, we also can teach them about how to do this work of abolitionist work and how to, envision futures where freedom is involved. So I think, both of those things. In my paper, I talked about critical content analysis for 2 different books. I'm sure that people on the call know them, but one of them was Crown, an ode to the fresh cut. Derek Barnes and Gordon C. James actually just won a prize at the NCTE conference where a lot of us were there. So within our community, they definitely get a lot of love. And I think the love should be even much more widespread. But I took up that book and then Ada Twist Scientist, which is a highly beloved book. And I think many of you know by now that Netflix has taken up that series. There's a new series and it's got like the Obamas behind it. I mean, this is like a really big deal to have Ada Twist Scientist, this little Black girl, you know, representing who we can become. But in my chapter, I'm actually taking to task a little bit this idea of Ada Twist Scientist being the symbol that we look to, because, you know, we hear people say, I didn't grow up with characters that look like me. And my question is it enough to have them look like us? I think we need to challenge authors. We need to challenge the stories to make sure that we are doing more than just the surface level of having characters that look Black or look brown. And so I want to talk about how when we dig below the surface, we see that, you know, in this book in particular, I believe that Ada Twist Scientist could be interchangeable with a character of any other race. And so what I say is that that is not enough. Yes, include that book. Like I mentioned downstairs, I've got my two daughters, one of whom has been saying for years, she's just now 8, and for years she's been telling me that she wants to be a paleontologist. She wants to be a scientist like her physicist dad. So when I think about Ada Twist Scientist, she is a perfect example of the kind of character that my daughter needs to see. But at the same time, like I mentioned, let's dig a little bit deeper and figure out how much she actually represents our cultural ways of knowing, our cultural literacy practices. And I challenge us to say that it's not enough. Let's have Ada Twist Scientists in our classrooms, yes, but let's also make sure that we have examples where we've got actual real life stories of Black women scientists that have pushed the envelope, that have resisted, that have done things that are unimaginable that our children need to learn. And so that's part of what I take up in my chapter. It was completely a joy to write. I thank you to the people who offered, you know, insight. I would say, Esther, in general, you push me. One of the questions that was just posed recently is how do we wrestle with this idea of multiculturality and anti-Blackness? And I would say that a lot of the early childhood educators that I work with are more versed in this conversation about multicultural literature. And so that's another way, you know, if we look deeply, multicultural literature is like another form of anti-Blackness because we're not really naming Blackness. We're not really talking about anti-Blackness. And so this chapter, again, like I mentioned, thank you, Esther, for pushing me a little bit further to be even more specific. But I want to talk about how anti-Blackness shows up even in when we think we're doing the best of bringing in diverse characters. Like it's close, y'all, but it's no cigar, right? And so those are some of the things that I brought up. And as I mentioned, you know, being answerable to my daughters and making sure that the characters are not just on the surface little Black girls, but that are really representing our deep cultures. Those are some of the things I was trying to do with my paper. So thank you so much for being here, y'all. It's an honor.
Thank you.
Thank you for those reminders that young people are communal, and the place where we kill their communal understandings is school, right? And then how do we now try to end that practice? Thank you for that.
Yeah, Brooke, I think you were also there. I see a connection between the first kitchen table talk when Gloria Ladson-Billings reminded everybody that Amanda Gorman, that there were many, many brilliant Black young poets, and Amanda Gorman isn't the one. So love that love that piece, and love how much you bring us to think better and harder about representation and going beyond.
I received that, Lee, and it also just brings up to mind, you know, who is it that we shed a spotlight on? And this is by no means taking anything away from Amanda Gorman because she's amazing, but what about the little Black girls who maybe don't present in the ways that we consider valuable? Maybe their academic speak is a little too, African American vernacular English, these types of things. How can we really make sure that we shine a light on them as well and cultivate their brilliance? Because like you mentioned, the brilliance is there, and sometimes we're the ones that shut it down, right?
Well, I'll jump in unless folks have other comments. Thank you so much, Brooke. Really appreciate that, especially with, I have an almost 5-year-old daughter, Leela Joy, who just devours that show and the book. And you give me a lot to think about when I read your chapter, and now that she's watching the Netflix series, a lot to think about for our little Black girls growing up reading these books, and Black boys, as my son is, starting to read his own. So I'm going to shout out one of our authors who was not able to make it tonight, Brian Gibbs. He wrote a piece that's actually pretty resonant with me right now. I'm actually in Tulsa, Oklahoma with family for the holiday, and we extended our trip so that we could tour the historic Greenwood district, the Black Wall Street district, and really just, take in the history of the race massacre that happened here. So a lot of these pieces and our theme for the issue deeply resonant leading up to tonight's webinar. So just really appreciating everybody's pieces and thoughts and feedback tonight as I take in all of that with really horrific truth here in Tulsa that was not taught. A lot of the cousins here, that wasn't a part of the curriculum. So, we talk about that vulnerability and the shame. And so a lot of them, as they were with us on these tours, thinking about how they felt shame around not knowing a history in their backyards and not knowing, what happened just blocks away. And it happened, and it having to be 2021 before the state of Oklahoma committing to teaching this history in our classrooms. So I just want to shout out Brian Gibbs. He wrote the piece, Strange Fruit, Teaching the Present and Past of Racial Violence in the Rural South. And in that piece, he talks about attending to talking about lynchings in the classroom and just sort of the tensions and challenges around that. And so Kathleen, if you'll join me here, we'll move on to your piece. And I know you have a co-author, so you might want to shout your co-author out too when you're responding. You're the co-author of Abolitionist Teacher Education in the Contact Zone, and tensions of facilitating teacher candidate learning in activist educator spaces. And so before we jump in, just as we've been asking all the other previous contributors, to whom are you answerable and why? And then after that, I'll pose a question.
Awesome, thank you, thank you. I'm humbled and honored to be part of this conversation, and it's just been really rich so far, and I'm really glad to continue it. I live in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I'm a teacher educator at West Chester University, which is about an hour west of Philadelphia. And living in Philadelphia, living in the state of Pennsylvania, which has the largest gap, funding gap between the wealthiest and the poorest school districts. I have to say I'm accountable to the teachers and the students in Philadelphia. I'm accountable to the students that my students will someday teach. And so in all that I do as a teacher educator, I'm always thinking about the students in the schools that my students will teach, and specifically the students who have been historically and systemically marginalized by schools. So the queer students, the Black and brown students, immigrant students, students who speak languages other than English. And so in what I do, I keep them in my mind. And I would say Katie, my co-author, I want to give her a shout. She and I did this together, and she just couldn't be here tonight, but she speaks of the communities within which we work, and the way she lives out her practice. She's a model for me in really being accountable to the folks with whom we work that are out in the communities that are in Philadelphia. And so that's the start. Yeah, that's the answer to that first question.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Yeah.
So I have Stove's comments in my mind, right? Earlier comments about abolitionist framework and what that means and in particular ways, right? And so part of that necessarily means ending or eliminating harm and also committing to building something tangible, something liberatory. And so I'm thinking about your piece and your work with pre-service teachers and the challenging work of taking them into activist community spaces and wanting to know more about how you navigate and negotiate this very thing, right? This commitment to ending harm, right? As white, monolingual, middle-class teachers are entering what I'm assuming, right, are spaces where folks of color are deeply entrenched in communities and, as you mentioned, your own commitments. And so I'm wondering if you might tell us more about those tensions and challenges and how you ensure that part of this process is moving toward ending harm, and how do we, as a teacher educator, I'm also interested in knowing how we not only frame this work, but help pre-service teachers enact this work in real liberatory ways, especially working with predominantly white, middle-class, monolingual pre-service teachers.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting sort of a central tension of our work, which is that our institution is very reflective of the national trend of teacher education, which is we have a large percentage of our students are white, monolingual, speaking English, and from middle-class suburban upbringings. And the spaces into which we brought them, we created a extracurricular experience for students. So we were sort of building outside of the traditional structures and accountability frameworks of teacher preparation. We created an extracurricular experience where we brought students from our school into activist educator spaces. So we brought them to a conference organized by the Teacher Action Group Philly, which is no longer in existence, but was a long-standing teacher activist community in Philadelphia. And the year that we wrote about, we did this several years, but the year we wrote about in our piece, we also brought them to the New York Collective of Radical Educators Conference in New York, the NICOR conference. And as you mentioned, Keisha, those spaces, especially NICOR, talk about like an embodied space. It's a powerful alternative space. We saw it as an abolitionist space, a space of building the kind of learning environment in which we, hope to see. It really centered the voices of youth. It centered the voices of women of color specifically. There were a lot of cultural and sort of practices that really ensured affirmation of trans bodies, of queer bodies, of varying ability bodies. And so to bring our mostly white students into that space, it really brought to the surface some tensions that Katie and I have been feeling throughout all of our time doing this work, which is what's our responsibility? How does this change us as teacher educators in this space? How does this change our roles? How do we manage some of the tensions that come up in terms of what our students are trying to do in the space versus what we want them to do? So for example, we wanted them to be transformed personally by the space. We wanted them to rethink themselves, their identities. And we found that they were going in looking for strategies and tools that they could take back. And so we had to really think through how we could shift our practice to ensure that when they go into these spaces, they are at least moving towards some of the dispositions and mindsets and willingness to be transformed that we were hoping for. And I think there was a big mismatch between how Katie and I sort of felt in the space and our students, and we were really thinking through various challenges that came up. And the last thing I'll say before turning it over to dialogue is, I think a lot of amazing work is happening where teacher education is moving out of traditional university classrooms, out of the traditional student teaching sort of dyad. And then in that work, I think it really asks us as teacher educators to really reimagine who we are. And our article tries to it made visible some of the struggles that we faced as white teacher educators with our white students in a space like that.
Mhm. Thank you. Thank you for raising some of the challenges that you experienced. And I'm actually thinking about Brian Gibbs, who's not here, but in his piece, there's a quote that I plan to ask him about, but I think it's relevant. There's a quote where he's teasing out his positionality. And in the quote, he says, racism is a white problem, a problem of white supremacy, lack of white understanding, and acknowledgement that there is a problem, which is also why I pursue, his research, right? So it just made me think about that.
Yeah.
All right, great. We are going to move on to our next paper. And so we have Catherine Ye, Paulo Tan, and Daniel Reinholz, and they are the authors.
Oh, you're muted, Dr. Coles. No, are you back?
Oh, am I? What, did you all hear anything? I'll just start over. So anyway, we're going to move on to our new paper. And I want to invite Catherine Ye, Paulo Tan, and Daniel Reinholz to the table, this part of our conversation. And they're the authors of Rightful Presence in Times of Crisis and Uprisings, A Call for Disobedience. And so, of course, just like everyone else, if you all could take a moment to tell us who you are answerable to. And then the question that I really want to wrestle with you all as I was reading the paper, right? So we get to learn about dehumanizing mathematics education in the time of COVID-19, but really just like within this larger and ongoing legacy in context of white supremacy. And so after you all talk about who you're answerable to, I'm hoping that you all can discuss with us more about disobedience, and particularly, of course, as rightful presence as a way to transform mathematics education, and really why this is truly necessary now, and what does such disobedience allow us to see and achieve, both in mathematics education, but even beyond that, that context. So I'll hand it over to you all.
I'll start first. Hi all, Catherine Ye. I'm deeply honored to be here. Starting off with the question of who am I answerable for and to. Dr. Lee Patel's that question and even the start of her book around the pedagogy of pausing has greatly shaped how I think about the world. When we wrote this article, and still now, it was a time of great pain and division. For myself, I questioned a lot around what deep honor to be in this space and do I belong and what should I say in this space, right? And I think about as an East Asian that focuses on math, and when you close your eyes and you think about who's good at math and how often people see me, not usually a woman, but usually an Asian man. And I think about the importance of visibility and invisibility and how important for me to be answerable to place, that my current home is on the Tomba land. The coalition building between Larry Itliang and Cesar Chavez to form UFW, and the birthplace of Yuri Kochiyama, the beautiful individual that held Malcolm X when he was shot, to remind me that the birth of Asian American is a term built from the Black liberation movement. So when I think about who I'm answerable to, I think about being answerable to my elders, my activist elders, that history of Asian American activism and solidarity work that is being denied and not made apparent as we think about Asian American hate, that we are not just vulnerable, but we are powerful because of coalition building. I think about being answerable to my children, the two loves of my life that are 10 and 14, and who have shown so much more activist roots as they push for ethnic studies in their school site, because histories of solidarity and of who we are matter. And I think of being answerable to myself, the younger me that did not know my history and thought that my work was to be quiet, and that for me to fit the mold of what it means to be an Asian American woman or girl in the field. So that is what I think about being answerable to. And I'll stop there so that my colleagues can talk about what they're answerable for before we move on.
Hey everybody, I'm Paulo Tan, and I would say I'm answerable to my son, who is 17, and I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for him. I have been bear witness to lots of harm that's been done to him over the years because he's a disabled individual, and to the families of those who have to be in the violent spaces of IEP meetings, and to witness, the kind of education that disabled students are subject to, the kind of dehumanization that they are in spaces every day that does not cultivate their violence, that again does a lot of harm. And so that's one person that I'm answerable to, and in thinking about all the harms that I've caused as well as a parent who have I'm not a disabled person, but I've learned a lot from many of those, as Catherine mentioned, who have come before us, who have done some great thinking, great work to be in a place that we are right now. I'm thinking specifically with folks who work in disability studies, folks who do discrete work, so disability critical studies, as well as those in our mathematics education field who have done a lot of great work with equity. And so again, the folks that have come before me, my son, and again, all the families and individuals who are currently in that system that we have an urgent need to stop the harm.
Hi everyone, Daniel Reinholz here. You probably saw one of my little ones was with me earlier, so I'm definitely, when I heard that question, I think about those little ones and kind of the world they're going to inherit and how we're going to build a better world for them. I think channeling the conversation I've heard other folks bringing up already, definitely feeling that accountability to myself as a white person in a white supremacist society, and what it means to dismantle that in a white supremacist academy every day, working with colleagues and trying to educate them, and feeling that responsibility. And then at the same time, as a disabled person, literally my body since the day I've been born fighting to kill me, and as an autistic person in the academy, and just feeling those layers of intersectionality as disability continues to be invisibilized. And the problem that we know is it's especially, Black and brown kids who are disabled. When we look at how ableism and we look at how racism and anti-Blackness and white supremacy go together, right? We see again and again students being overrepresented and underserved in special education. We see the way that police violence plays out, particularly with respect to anti-Blackness and ableism together, right? People might think that I'm strange, and if I was Black, people might think I was dangerous, and it's really fucked up. Sorry, I think that's not for the webinar. And then I just think of all those layers and what it means to sort of be able to hold that space in the academy, but also fighting for everyone else around me who's also disabled and might not have that voice or might not have that space, and what it means to, especially in mathematics, when we see, this is the place where it comes right to our article. I don't know if we're gonna have time to talk about it, right? But we know math is just like such a tool for defining what's good and normal and valued. And I think, sometimes math is like, it's like money laundering for white supremacy and ableism and all of these other systems that we know dehumanize us. We know they segregate and sort people, and then we put a number on it and somehow it becomes valid, right? And we do that to our children as they're trying to navigate the system. We do that in college admissions. We do that in tracking. We do that in special education. And so what it means to be a part of a discipline that's complicit in all of that sorting, all of that harm. And I can't remember who said it earlier, but we're so far past harm reduction, right? We need to, I think it was Dave, we need to eliminate that. And we can fight and have math wars about Common Core and all of these curricula, but what does it mean for us to really revolutionize what we're doing in a way that is rehumanizing, in a way that really feels and understands the embodied nature of our children, of our own lives, of our own selves occupying this space in our different Zoom boxes. And I think, you know, that's really what we were dreaming of. And it was such an honor to write that piece with Paula and Catherine. And thank you for having us.
Thank you. It's an honor to have that piece included in this issue and in this journal. We're so grateful for all of you and for everything that you've shared so authentically and powerfully here today. And in the interest of time, we have we're going to share a video from one of our authors who couldn't be here on our social media accounts. So please follow along Dr. Zambailas, who wrote a really dope piece in this issue as well. Please follow the social media accounts and share widely. But here's how we want to close out. We're going to ask that all the panelists unmute themselves. We're going to pose one question from the audience, and we ask that, you know, a couple of you just chime in. And then we're just going to close out with joy and vibes, because this is hard and heavy and complex work and vulnerable work. And so we just go a little bop. We're just going to play a little bop at the end to close us out. And we hope that the folks on the other end of this Zoom will vibe out with us as well. So real quick, before we do that, I want to pose a question that was asked by Kia Turner. Thank you so much for this talk. Kia says, I'm wondering if folks can talk about how you embody abolitionist practices as academics. I'm a first-year doc student and former teacher, and I struggle with understanding how to enact and practice abolition while also residing within academic institutions that cause and have caused harm historically.
Yo, thank you so much for that question. And continuing the real talk of tonight, anytime you have a question around what it is that you're doing, say two things. This is some bullshit, and I have committed to do something different. That is the constant reminder of what it is that you are in, and now what it is that you must do to do something else, right? This is some bullshit. I got to do something different. Let me find the folks who are doing something different. That is your job as a grad, because you're already in your fuck grad school moment now. That's a good place to be, because it's some surreal, absurd shit. Perfect. Now you use the lever to say, this ain't the way. This is some bullshit. Here's what I'm going to do.
Ooh.
I think reside is such a powerful word. And I would ask you to not cede that to any academic institution. Don't reside in any academic institution. Reside in your home, reside in your heart. And remember that, yes, we should remove cops from campuses, but faculty do far more surveillance than cops do on campuses. Sorry.
Words.
Speak on it. Speak on it, Lee. Tell them what it is.
Ooh.
So look to places that it just, you know, as Dave was saying, as so many people have said so beautifully, so much gratitude to everybody here. Look to where there is a beautiful claim of life, and don't reside in an institution that was not built for you.
Ooh, is he on that mic? Do we have one more person that wants to chime in?
I do.
Oh, okay, go, bro.
I just want to say there's so much that we need to outright reject. There's a lot of resistance, but at the end of the day, I also think there's so much reflection that needs to happen. So when I think about being in the academy, I have to be answerable to myself at the end of the day. And so, you know, I work at the Indiana Institute on Disability and Community. And I have found so often that there's this struggle between talking about equity as it relates to race or as it relates to folks with disabilities. So that is something that I reject. But as an individual, what I can do is reflect continually on my practice. So I'm thinking about, I don't actually say I stand with you anymore. I might say I work with you, or I, you know, move with you, whatever it is. I'm trying to reflect on the language that I use in the academy as well. And I think that that's an ongoing practice for all of us to engage in.
Whew. I was instructed by the powers that be not to cut off the dialogue. If there's somebody else who wants to say something, the mic is hot and it's here. Please chime in.
Okay, I'm gonna say something. I've been thinking about this. One of the frustration is to be in academia, is how useless sometimes I feel for the thing, because the word is out there and sometimes you can feel it's on fire. And one of the things I feel more useful is, even more useful I feel when I'm filling up these bottles with baking soda for people who are out in the streets doing the kind of work that we should be working with, and supporting them, or bringing, I don't know, cooking for these activists who are on the line, bringing them, I don't know, wood in order to keep warm. I think that I feel more useful outside. There is this notion that we think that we are useful from our chairs in those offices, in those buildings that were not built for us. I am more useful on the streets, even if it's just serving and bringing water.
I would love to add as well. I would say embodying abolitionist practices is also just you asking this question and realizing that you need to honor yourself, honor your place in the academy, that you belong, and engaging in self-love and community love. Like realizing that how you feel and wondering your place there, it's because the place wasn't made for us. It wasn't made for this work. So you feeling this weirdness is acknowledging the tensions that's in play. So engaging in that self and community love that challenges that this is about what you do alone. But in truth, none of us can do this alone. It's about how we do this in community with others, with those that we serve. And as we're serving them, they also serve us.
Mm.
You're not alone.
Wow. Let me know. Okay, I'm seeing collective snaps at this point. I'm going to just close out by expressing our deep gratitude for who each and every one of you are. And as I said before, for who each and every one of you choose to be every single day, because that's not an easy choice. Thank you for being a part of the EEE community. Thank you to our audience, our family, for pulling up. It sounded like Brooke pulled up the whole squad. So thank you, Brooke. And I'm going to close out with this bop. It's a real bop because we're going to end on this joy. I warned y'all, okay? Thank you all and have a beautiful evening.
Yeah, Spider-Man and freezing full effect. You ready, Ron? I'm ready. You ready, Dave? I'm ready, Slick. Are you? Oh yeah, take it down. Girl, I must warn you. I sense something strange in my mind. Yo, situation is. Let's cure it 'cause we're running out of time. It's all so beautiful. Relationships they seem from the start. It's also when love is not together from the heart. Check it out. It's driving me out of my mind. That's why it's hard for me to find. Can't get it out of my head. Miss her, kiss her, love her. Wrong move, you're dead. That girl is poison. If I were you, I'd take precaution. high step to me, fly girl.
Thank you all so much. I love to see it. Have a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful evening. Love you all. Bye. Yeah.
Thank y'all. Appreciate
Peace,
y'all.
everybody. Thank y'all so much for this. This was dope. Thank y'all.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.